What is the situation like in Sheikh Jarrah today, nearly 2 months after the Israeli onslaught in Gaza and East Jerusalem, and amid ongoing arrests and repression across Palestine?
The situation in Sheikh Jarrah is pretty tense. We are under an illegal blockade and have been for over a month now. The Israeli attacks never cease. They have never stopped. There has never been an end to colonial violence for the past 73 years of our lives as Palestinians, but especially in the past year for our lives as people from Sheikh Jarrah. Today, we're facing increased levels of police violence as well as increased levels of settler violence. And often, both of these entities work together, they have a partnership together.
The struggle in Sheikh Jarrah today is a continuation of the forced evictions in 1948. What is your family's experience of the occupation?
Yeah, my family, my grandmother Rifqa Al-Kurd was displaced, forcibly expelled from her home in Haifa and occupied Haifa in 1948. And she was displaced a few more times. And then again in 2009, when half of our home in Sheikh Jarrah was taken. And had she been alive today, she would have been 105 years old, and she would have had her fifth or sixth time being thrown out of her home by Israeli colonizers. Today, 28 families in Sheikh Jarrah, over 80 families in Silwan, thousands of Palestinians all over colonized Palestine face the imminent risk of ethnic cleansing and displacement at the hands of the Israeli government, working systemically to expel them from their lands and reduce their population and demographic presence in Jerusalem.
What is daily life like under Israeli occupation? What risks do you face from the Israeli army and settlers occupying your neighborhood?
We're at risk of imminent displacement at any time. Israeli settlers armed with their guns, with the help of Israeli army and police, with the Israeli occupation forces, can come and throw us out in the streets. But not only this, we are at risk simply for being Palestinian. Every single day we hear about Palestinians being executed, killed extrajudiciously by the Israeli occupation forces. You don't have to be doing anything. You just have to be somewhere, sometime, and you will get shot for merely being Palestinian. We've seen this, and we've seen an autistic person get shot while he was running away. We've seen a woman get shot just while she was going to work. We've seen people get shot. We've seen weddings being raided. We've seen homes being raided. We've seen so much colonial violence, so much state-sanctioned terror over our course of our lives that I am convinced that I don't have to do anything. I don't have to speak out to be targeted by the Israeli occupation. And they could kill me, they could come and execute me and kill me, and then the next day call it a mistake, like they did to a Palestinian young man in Sharait, Ramallah a few weeks ago. So it's better for us to speak out against all of this racism and colonial violence we face, because none of us are safe under colonialism anyway.
Describe the resistance that Palestinians are waging against Israeli repression and colonization in Sheikh Jarrah and beyond.
You know, I think we talk a lot about the police violence, about the occupation forces brutality, about all of their sinister efforts to throw us out of our homes. But we don't often talk about our defiance as a people. The people in Sheikh Jarrah, the people in Silwan, the people of Beta are all bare-chested, are all unfunded, and are all working on their own within their own communities and have been defending their homes, their lands against ethnic cleansing, against settler violence, against state-sanctioned terrorism for the past months. And they've been doing so bare-chested. And it's admirable to see all of the courage and all of the Palestinian stubbornness that's come out of all of this colonial violence that we are faced with.
The general strike in Palestine in May showed incredible courage as well. What was the significance of the strike?
Yeah, I mean, the general strike that we saw on May 18th, we've seen nothing like it since 1936, since the general strike in the 30s. And it represented nationwide unity for the first time in a long time. It represented our collective Palestinian voice saying no to colonial violence, saying no to participating in colonial violence and colonial systems. And it reminded people of the power we have as consumers of the Israeli economy, of the power we have as contributors to the Israeli economy, and the value of our own economy, of the Palestinian economy, of the Palestinian production, I think these are amazing steps that the general strike was able to accomplish.
What is the way forward for the fight against Israeli occupation and imperialism outside of Palestine, especially in the United States, which is the strongest support of Israel in the world?
We're not going to see results overnight. But I think the way forward is to continue protesting, to continue boycotting, to continue pushing for sanctions, to continue speaking about Palestine, to continue shifting the narrative. I also think it's more simply people, all people anywhere in the world need to fight imperialism, need to fight fascism within their own countries, independent of where their countries stand with the Israeli occupation authorities. People need to be protesting imperialism and fascism at all times, period, all forms of inequality and racism, period. And that will be a tremendous help to the Palestinian people.
Who lives in Sheikh Jarrah? What is your experience and the experience of your family and community as working class Palestinian refugees?
You know, the community in Sheikh Jarrah is a community of working class people. We are all predominantly refugees. We were thrown out of our homes in 1948. I'm talking about my grandparents. My neighbors' grandparents were thrown out of their homes. And when you're a refugee, you lead a refugee life no matter where you are. So yeah, we are working class people working every day. And we are working against billionaire-backed, US registered Israeli settler organizations that have millions and millions in funding. And we are just fighting them by ourselves.
What role has the youth in Palestine played in confronting the latest Israeli attacks and repression in Palestine?
I think the youth involvement in the political scene as of the past few months is amazing. I'm optimistic but cautious, of course. I think this is truly unprecedented and it should continue and continue and continue, and people should be having conversations with everyone they can. I think what makes this moment unique is the fact that we are refusing to accept the normalized language. We are refusing to accept sanitized terms. We are calling things by their names. We are calling the occupation police because that's what they are. We are calling terrorists because that's what they are. And that's what's happening. I think we are finally unafraid of speaking the truth, the whole truth. And we are doing so bypassing the gatekeeping of mainstream media, of digital censorship. We are doing all of this despite all of these barriers. And I think that's what's admirable about the youth's involvement in the recent struggle for Palestine. And I hope it continues. And I urge everybody to continue.
What do you make of the large mobilizations of people across the world in support of the struggle for Palestinian liberation?
I think this is an unprecedented movement in volume, right? I think we've not seen this amount of numbers before participating. When you're speaking about 200,000 people walking out protesting in London, that's something that we have never seen before. Now, my faith is that it continues, that these numbers do not vanish. And what I know for certain is that we have politicized an entire generation, and that entire generation is going to grow up standing on the right side of history and working to defend oppressed people like the Palestinian people.
How are views among young people in Palestine changing towards their traditional political leaders?
I mean, certainly, I think today's youth are fed up with our so-called leadership that has failed us repeatedly for decades and decades, and we are taking things into our own hands. This movement is largely a leaderless movement, and that's the beauty of it. The elimination of hierarchies, the idea that no language is policed, the idea that people are allowed to express the way they feel about their oppression in whatever way they want, and demand liberation, full liberation and decolonization, has been something that we haven't seen on the table for many, 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 many years. And today we are demanding these things unabashedly, and we're not following through in the footsteps of anybody.
What do you think of the Arab Ram Party that is now part of a new coalition government in Israel?
In my personal opinion, all of these people are terrorists, no matter who is leading any political agenda. And the Israeli authorities, they are all terrorists, they are all war criminals. The Palestinian street also agrees largely that Nothing good comes out of a colonial government.
Mhm.
Nothing good comes out of a government that is thirsty for land and thirsty for lives. And it doesn't matter if there's an Arab in the new coalition government. It doesn't matter who is holding the dagger, who is holding the gun. It's the same bullet. We're all biting here. It's the same knives we're all feeling in our bodies, in our lands, in our homes. It doesn't matter, because our struggle for Palestinian liberation is not identitarian. It's not about religion. It's not about race. It's not about who's Arab and who's not. It's about fighting against oppression. It's about fighting against colonialism. So it doesn't matter who's holding the gun.